I'd like to start by sharing some of the places where I am interacting or using, adopting AI. And I'm gonna try to share a few things with you in 3 slides, and then we're gonna go into breakout rooms. So just want to make sure I don't go over. Just Michaela, maybe you can tell me when my when it's time to go to breakout rooms.
Okay.
So, thank you. So my formal training is in computational applied mathematics, and I work at a university as public state university for about 16 years, and then over this academic year, I began working for a liberal arts college. So the two institutions are have very different sizes of student undergraduate student enrollment. A lot of what I taught over the previous 15 years had to do with, well, almost all levels of undergraduate education. A lot of things that had to do with applied mathematics, calculus, statistics, linear algebra, and we had a class called mathematical computing, which was an introduction into programming and kind of in the context of mathematics. In the institution where I am right now, I am teaching a Gen Ed statistics class. There is a Gen Ed course in mathematics and a few courses in computer science. Some of them are directly related with artificial intelligence, but I also teach business data analytics, which contains a portion, subdomain there of predictive models. So some of the areas where I'm using artificial intelligence, I'm gonna say I am an adopter that's I'm kind of using it lightly in the classroom, kind of day to day. I am using it more behind the scenes. For example, in recent months, I've got more involved with Microsoft Copilot, in part because my institution right now is a Microsoft 365 school. And I also have a subscription to ChatGPT, which I use for mostly personal use. So I also try to keep these camps separate about work usage using my school account and then other things that are only my business in my ChatGPT private account. Um, and so I'm using it for like creating materials like um, summaries or creating question banks, creating writing exams, things of that sort. Our learning management system is Blackboard Ultra, and it comes with some integration of generative artificial intelligence for creating rubrics and for also creating question banks and creating exams. So I think at least I have this in this slide. One of the type of courses that I regularly teach has to do with computer programming. It used to be I used to teach MATLAB, so a lot of my students in classes that had to do with modeling would learn MATLAB, numerical analysis, numerical linear algebra. That my first iterations of those classes were all with MATLAB. And then over the years, I transitioned from MATLAB into R and more recently into Python. So the courses that I teach now that have that computing component are using either R or Python. And teaching that type of content, I have found platforms that are not exactly powered by AI or AI light, which are very effective as far as having the content for learning computer programming. So I'm talking about platforms like DataCamp. DataCamp actually has a program for higher education where educators and students can get free accounts and it gives access to very useful content with modules and automated exercises for coding. There is another platform that's called SciBooks. SciBooks is by it's not free, and it depends on the type of class, but it has a lot of content that has to do with computer programming, a lot of languages from C++ to Fortran. I mean, Python or SQL. And so those platforms could be, I think, very effective as far as providing immediate feedback or formative feedback in tasks that are related to writing computer code. Um, so, and another thing here I have that has to do with if you want to set up some type of guidelines in your classroom. This visual guideline that's like color coded was, to my knowledge, was invented by the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. You could download the document where this is published, and this is licensed under Creative Commons. But basically, the red is one extreme where there is absolutely no use allowed of AI, whether it's an assessment or a paper, whatever it is that you're doing with your students. And then it goes from red, yellow, green. Then the last level there, number four, is basically all, yeah, use it a lot, So I have used somewhere, I think what I have used in the past is probably more aligned with what is here, number two or number three. And I have done that specific. Sometimes I have some language in my syllabus, but I do it specifically if it is a report, they run an experiment or they carry out some type of activity. I call them labs, laboratories. And usually a lab would have two or three or five steps. They complete those tasks or complete those steps, and then they write their results into a format that looks like a paper, like a biology laboratory or chemistry or physics laboratory. And part of what I require there is to have some disclosure about if they are using any form of artificial intelligence, they should disclose how they use it. And it takes a little bit of trial and error to get them in the for both educators and students, how you actually enforce some kind of disclosure practice. You kind of need to coach the students, and sometimes you need to grade them very harshly, and then in a second iteration of grading for the next report, then they kind of get more into the type of language that you like to see, right? So but I think this is an area of, do we allow the students to use AI or how they're going to use it? This is something that's currently a lot of people a lot of instructors are wondering the same thing, or maybe struggling how to enforce some type of policy. So um, I also have, we're going to share with you copies of these slides, and in the very last slide, there are some links to some of these resources. Um, I mentioned NCDPI, the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. You'll find a link of where to access the document where they publish that. There is also a movement, I call it a movement, about artificial intelligence resistant assignments. So designing assignments or assessments that are a little more less prone to be so there's some kind of approach there to how to structure some of those assignments so that they're a little more resistant to AI use. There is a report that was published by Cornell University with some reflections about, the role of generative AI. I think a lot of people now refer to AI in very broad terms, like whether Gemini or ChatGPT or Copilot, what those technologies produce, they refer to that as AI. That is really a very specialized branch of artificial intelligence, is generative AI. The other branch would be predictive artificial intelligence, which is the type of thing we use on a regular basis to find driving directions, or a lot of these many other applications. So what you see here on the top, there are a couple of frameworks by two organizations, the UNESCO and Educase, and these are frameworks in a more general sense about if you are planning to UNESCO provided a framework basically for countries to uh, implement some some of these competencies into artificial intelligence from basically all grade levels in education. And there's an organization called News Literacy Project. They also have some very good resources for these are resources mostly for educators and not in higher education, but um, uh, more in K through 12, or even maybe it's more like 6 through 12. But still, I think some of those resources can be very valuable for those of us that work in higher education. So I think, like as far as what happened here? As far as like concerns and reflections, I think the one concern that many of us have is we are working with students. We're supposed to be, our product is their knowledge and whatever skills they learn. And so are they really learning, right? And is one concern some of us have is in the presence of AI, maybe they're not learning, or maybe they're having AI produce all these documents that we use to give them a score and check mark their like yeah they're learning. In other words, is there fraud going on there? Is it possible that they are not, our students are not really absorbing, what they need to, and this is all because of AI. So I don't know. I think I in this academic year, I am in a new position, a new job. The classrooms are a lot smaller than they used to be for me. The student profile is basically a residential school. Most of the students live on campus. And what I'm noticing in that type of setup is that AI or not, students are very distracted in a general sense. And the distractions are coming from so many directions. There are devices between the smartphone and the laptop and the tablet. I have to compete in a classroom when I'm trying to talk to them in person. And I sometimes have to pause and say, you need to put your phone away. You need to close your laptop. We're not using the computer right now. And so I may sound a little old-fashioned, maybe I'm getting this reputation, but I think it's a struggle. Like I work with students also that are very young, 18 through 21, maybe. That's the core, the bulk of our students. And their attention they are really distracted. And so I don't know, but this is part of where we are. Having on a I have a very strict policy for exams. When I proctor exams, I make everybody remove their smartphone and put all the smartphones in a place where I can see them. And that may produce separation anxiety for some students, but it is an exam. It is difficult for me to have a policy like that in every single class, right? So everybody attends class and they usually have their phone and their bag near them. So um, I don't know. I think that we should have more of this type of webinar reflection, brainstorming, and hopefully we'll find solutions.
All right. Thank you, Ariel, for prepping us here. So our plan is to actually break into two rooms and have some discussions about this topic and just kind of get our questions, our ideas, our resources out there, share with each other. So what I'm going to do here is share a couple things. The first is a link to um, kind of this master Google Doc because we'll have one Google Doc for each room. So while we are in these breakout rooms, they won't be recorded. I'll turn the recording won't work in the breakout room. So this is just open for discussion, but we would like for people to take some notes. So if you click on that link, you're going to navigate to a document that I'm going to show here. we go. Um, and whichever room you're in, you want to click on room one or room two. And that's going to open up another Google Doc that you'll see here for recording notes for the conversation. So as you can see here, there's boxes where you can take the notes. The first step is to make sure you know who's in the room. And then if people could also drop their names and affiliations in the chat in their room, that will help with recording them. And we recommend that you pick one person to scribe, to write down the notes for your room so we don't get confused with multiple people typing in here. And then we have some prompts that we can use to guide our discussions. You see these down below here. The goal is to try to discuss like 3 of these items. You also are welcome to discuss items related to AI in the classroom not included in these prompts below. So make this conversation useful for you. And then we'll come back together and we're going to share some of what we've learned, what we've been talking about with the group. And so each group should designate a share out speaker for when we come back together. And the share out part will be recorded. So are there any questions about how that's going to work here? No? All right. So I'm going to open up a couple of rooms. Okay. And yeah, we'll get to it. So I thought maybe we can come back together and briefly talk about some of the things we were talking about in our separate rooms. So maybe speaker for room one, if you want to tell us some of the things that you discussed, would like to share.
Room one had a scribe, but we didn't get to the part to select the speaker. So I don't know. Mario, do you think that either you or Julie, would like to share with the rest of the group?
Yeah, I can share. Julie did all the hard work of scribing, so it feels fair for me to be the one reporting out. All right, so we mostly focus on the AI and teaching, how we've been using AI in the classroom and some of our experiences and perhaps some parallels to other technologies as well. So primarily, at least for myself, I used it as an instructor on generating exams and brainstorming. Although it's very important to quadruple check, AI will sound very confident, but will sometimes generate not quite what you're asking for. We've also talked about using Copilot at the institutional level. Big difference between having some of the free versions or versions of these technologies. There's some concerns of accuracy, but also of privacy as well. So depending on which technology you're using, and again, on the subscription version you have, that could be of issue. What else? We talked about using it as a tutor, perhaps. Problem generation as well for exams. I know I personally had an issue where students used it for linear algebra and it generated some problems, but they were overly simplistic. And the students did not do any further prompting to generate more substantial problems. Things like subspaces functions as opposed to just subspaces in R2 or R3.
Mm.
And so that sort of leads to students using these technologies in a sort of least resistance path kind of approach where they just go out there and they find whatever explains the content, spoon feeds it to them without going through the course content that's provided and curated by instructors. And so that lack of critical thinking is a bit of a concern. And so we can sort of ask them to think critically, but I'm not sure if there's any ways of ensuring that.
Excellent. No, I agree with yeah, we lose control. We have lost control over knowing how they're going to engage with it and if they will do it in a way that still safeguards their learning. Definitely. Allison, you want to share some of the things that we were talking about in our room?
Absolutely. So we had Bruce with us too, who unfortunately just had to jump off a couple of minutes ago, but we got some good insights from him. So I think the theme of our room perhaps was that none of us are really experts. It's kind of the blind leading the blind. But we ended up talking a lot about sort of our perception of what students were using it for and how we want to adapt to it. So, students are telling us they're using it to break down difficult concepts, create practice problems, brainstorming, sort of middle of the night tutor. We talked a little bit about how office hours are sort of maybe shifting. They're not using us as much, they're using AI instead. And sort of what that means for us as instructors and how our role is going to change. So the very end of our conversation I thought was interesting. We went back to Ariel's point about AI resistant assessments, and we were wondering, is that even really possible anymore? Because AI keeps improving, so even if we think they're resistant right now, they won't be in a year, right? And so we're looking at like, what are some ways we can embrace it instead? What are the things we really want to be testing? So instead of testing, rote operations, we want to really find ways to test thinking. Michaela was talking about, her linear algebra class recently, where she had the last 2 weeks set aside for just students were giving the lectures in that last 2 weeks, and they could maybe use AI to help prepare their lecture, but in the end, it was them that actually had to, stand up there and deliver the content and illustrate their understanding of it. I thought that was a really nice way to say, of course you can use AI, but you still got to understand the material at the end of the day. So that was sort of the theme of our room. You think I sort of captured that, Michaela? You want to add anything?
Yeah. Yeah, I would just add, yeah, this whole idea of producing these AI proof assignments, it's a it's a little it does make you wonder if it's worth our time and effort, especially when the assignments in their original form, if completed as intended, might actually be pretty effective. So some of it is figuring out how do we get students to embrace learning and the importance of learning and not just output, right? We still have a few more minutes if we want to discuss a few more things as a group here or thoughts.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I have a
Mario?
question. So we've mentioned a little bit of using AI as tutoring or midnight office hours. I wonder how you all feel then about that kind of use of AI. I think personally, philosophically, I don't use it unless I already know the answer to, or I know the material well enough, because if it gives me something wrong, then I can catch it. And so I'm very concerned when anybody uses it in any particular way where, they're using it to learn something new. But what if it's teaching you something wrong, right? How can you check that? I'm not sure if there's any level of prompt engineering that's going to help with that because
Yeah,
engineering is
I
going to require some expertise on your own part as well. And then prompt
I
engineering is
can
going to be changed. Different versions of ChatGPT, different versions of AI will come different prompt engineering. So not sure what y'all feel about that.
so I have something to share because can you hear me?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I am taking a class right now and um it's something that I thought I knew things that there are parts because of my formal training in mathematics that overlap and they're really good foundations for data structures and algorithms. But this is a class in a computer science graduate program. And so I have been using ChatGPT with subscription to practice to get more practice problems, and in that process, I feel kind of what Mario is pointing out. I am very naive or almost new to this knowledge content area. The thing that I have with me is that I'm a skeptic. So I'm coming from like with that Mario viewpoint of like this AI, this chatbot may tell me something, and then sometimes because I have all these years of experience and malice, over these long calculation sequence and steps, boom, there is a step where I am like, this is not this is contradictory. You're just telling me something that here you're contradicting yourself. And then I get into a fight there, yeah, like little debate, like, no, but look at this and look at what you said like 3 pages ago. And then it recomputes and says, you're absolutely right. It always agree with me, like, yeah, let me correct that. And it generates another version. So even with those mistakes, as I'm becoming more aware, then now I know, okay, so if I see something's out of place, I have to question it, and I have to ask for an explanation, and I have to, make sure that it provides another version. But it's still helping me because sometimes I get stuck and I don't even know where to start. And by having those conversations, I am gaining a little bit of clarity. So I guess data structures and algorithms is like maybe analysis or modern algebra, abstract algebra. So those are classes in those undergraduate programs or graduate programs that are like pillars, right? So when I am going over I don't know, shortest path algorithm for graph data structures, then I can see how it's coming back. I usually have a PDF copy of the slide deck for the lecture. I upload that and I start training the conversation with, okay, what's going on with this? Give me a summary. I don't really need the summary, but I'm trying the chatbot to start getting warm up. And then I start firing questions about exercises. And at some point, I say, I need a review and I need like practice questions for an exam. And when it comes back with this like study guide, the language is using, I can tell like this. I mean, it must be pulling from all possible courses in data structures, and it comes back with this is a really hot, important topic. This is gonna be in exams. These things are like really good to know. Here's a version you can remember. Um, and so I don't know. I think it's important to be a skeptic and to kind of develop that skill of like don't believe everything the AI says, and but kind of it's also important to find it how it works for you. And at some point, you just have to drop it and do the old school, read the book, and then suffer a little.
So I was going to jump in and say to Mario's question from the like student perspective, right? Because I've been seeing my students use a lot of this and use less of me. Like they've stopped coming to my office hours, and I've been reflecting on that a lot. And like, how do I want to repurpose, and how do I want to encourage them to use AI, right? And so one of the conversations I've been having with my students this week actually is, I think it's great if you want to use AI as a study tool. It'll talk to you at midnight, and I won't, right? That's a perk. Um, but maybe that means, instead of looking at office hours as a place where like I come when I'm stuck on a homework problem, office hours could now be a place where you come to reaffirm what you've learned from the AI. So like you could come to my office and just say, I want to check my understanding of bifurcation analysis. Can I just talk through this problem with you in the room and you can tell me whether or not I've got the proper understanding, right? And maybe that becomes the new sort of version of what office hours looks like. Because I know you can get help on your homework from the AI, but I can check your understanding perhaps better than it can, right? And so that's something I'm trying to encourage with my students now.
I love that,
Right. And
Allison.
that's actually, yeah, that's actually something kind of piggybacking off of that and this thinking about this question of students, you engaging more with AI. I do worry a little bit about the mental health aspect of that might mean that they're having fewer human interactions with their peers in class and with their instructors and tutors. And I do wonder, as we move forward and get more data and experience, what will that mean for our mental health as we engage in more conversations with our computer and maybe less conversations with actual people.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, on the topic of AI spitting out things that are incorrect and whatnot, and not like students not being professional, like not knowing like that things are incorrect. One thing I've been trying to do is like lean into errors a little bit and actually ask my students to use these tools to generate or like to generate mathematical work so let's say it's like a chain rule problem, like common errors that might students might make in chain rule. And so I ask students to actually ask the LLMs to generate incorrect work and then reflect on this and stuff like that. And this has changed like some of what I ask students to do on exam questions. And I do like traditional pen and paper, like no like devices allowed on my in my class. And so I'll ask questions like giving them mathematical work and asking them to critically analyze it, like where like what's happening from step A to step B. Write about it and explain that. Or like, are there any errors in this work? Can you spot these things and talk through that? And that's like a harder question than, just do the chain rule on this function or whatever, right? So it is kind of having like, students are having to level up in that way in my class now. Um, and maybe that's not a bad thing. I don't know. It
No,
makes me kind of excited.
I think that's a good approach. Yeah. I just remember that I recently read an article about agentic AI, like AI agents.
Mm.
There was an app. So there's an app, a company that launched this product where if you get subscription, the agents will take the class for you. Will go and take a course. Julie, you heard of this article?
No,
There's this
but
app.
I recently heard that you can just basically like have some AI like
Mhm.
basically answer all of your Canvas quiz problems all at once, and
Yeah, but
it's
it's not
done.
just telling ChatGPT to answer these questions for me. Is actually that's the agent part. So the AI agents, how they get plugged in. So they log in into Canvas or whatever the LMS, and then they do all the work pretending to be that profile, right? And then so pose discussion questions, answer quizzes, watch the videos, just be present there electronically as if it was that person, and then produce all the outputs. So I think that was a company that launched a product and they were only operating with Canvas. And then Canvas gave them a stop and desist. And I don't know. I mean, I think that's not really what the agentic seems to be. There's a lot of uses on like planning travel or planning, what restaurants to go or keeping up itineraries or kind of putting together things like Outlook calendar with Zoom meetings and when there is a meeting and there is a transcript and following up, that's what the agents can be very good at. But substitution of what is supposed to be your work, I don't know. I don't think that's what the agents are meant to do that.
I think we've had a very interesting couple of years. I think the pandemic has accelerated the use of technology for asynchronous learning. I think prior to the pandemic, I was very traditional, pen and paper. All my assignments were done by hand. I was very minimal on the learning system that we would use. After pandemic, all my assignments are online, except for the in-class exams. And I post everything and anything on my Canvas page and sort of all freely accessible online. And now my office hours are hybrid Zoom and in person. And then on top of that, we've had this business of AI, which has sort of upended the trust we have in any online asynchronous submitted assignment. So going back to back from purely, oh, everything could be asynchronously online to we don't trust anything that students do asynchronously online, I think has made me pivot to more in-class assessments. And I tell them, hey, you're welcome to use chat. I mean, don't use it, but if you do, I'm not going to bother catching you. But the way I run my course is if you don't pass the exams, you don't pass the class. I don't care if you get perfect hundreds on the homework. Um, just the way that this is now, I'm reassessing things and no more take-home exams because I used to give take-home exams. And so now I'm reassessing that. I'm reassessing, like Julie mentioned, what kinds of things are, first of all, doable in an in-class setting, but also then emphasize something slightly different rather than just computational?
Yeah, I think the online classes, I was very, very involved with them. And I think they're still going to stay I mean, in some programs. But even the asynchronous classes, they're gonna have to be modified because the assessment part, whether it's gonna be something with a lockdown browser and a timer, or those asynchronous classes, the way, I mean, the root of that mode of instruction is correspondence. People were sent materials and then they would send things over the mail. So those asynchronous classes could also have proctored exams. Students would have to go into testing centers, like physical testing facilities, where the proctors would have the instructions from the professor about how they are to be proctored. And we may need to for those classes, there may need to be a little bit of that, because even when you have lockdown browser, it's not like a magic cure of all things. People may still have two or three other devices open, but it helps with restricting what's in on that screen of that device. And if there is a timer on top of that, I mean, it's especially some of these math things, it's not so easy to just transcribe, and but yeah, I I agree with Mario that sometimes here this is going to require going more to traditional uh, means of like, yeah, pencil and paper for some things.
Well, and I also push the importance of the presentation and the communication. If you can, if it's a smaller class, if it's a large class, that's difficult to do.
Because
But
that is difficult to learn the skill of giving a presentation, to draft it, to I think for a lot of learners, the first reaction is to read. Now they have the slides and then they read, and
yeah,
it's just like it is really a process.
right. Well, I think so. We're at our time now, so we should probably adjourn. Thank you for joining us. We're going to be combining notes and sharing things out with the wider community. But thanks so much for joining us and joining with these conversations. And thanks to Ariel for introducing things and providing us with so many resources.